Good morning, St. Kitts and Nevis, and welcome to Inside the News. It is a pleasure to be back. I am your host for the morning, Joy Napier, and after a long hiatus, I am indeed very happy to be back on board and back on Win FM hosting Inside the News. Just a reminder, Inside the News is a nonpartisan program where we conduct in-depth discussions about what is happening regionally, locally, and internationally, and more importantly, how these news items affect us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We will be inviting call-ins on this morning's program, so just remember the number to call is 466-0989. We want to hear from you about the topics that we have to discuss, and we do have a packed program this morning. We're going to be looking at U.S. policy shifts and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. So welcome to Inside the News, and we can't wait to get started.
Into extra cash this Easter with TDC Financial Services. Need extra cash for your Easter celebrations? Whether it's shopping, home upgrades, a weekend getaway, or a fresh start. With TDC Financial Services Easter loan promotion, you can borrow up to $30,000 at low interest rates with affordable repayment terms. Getting your loan is quick and easy. Just visit any TDC Financial Services branch in St. Kitts on Central Street and in Nevis in the Longstone Building on Main Street in Charlestown. But hurry, this Easter offer is only available for a limited time. TDC Financial Services, where money is made easy.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly. People make the world go
round. Welcome back. This is Inside the News on Win FM 98.9. We're available live on Facebook Live. We are also available on YouTube, Instagram. So like, follow, subscribe, and keep up to date with Win FM. So this morning's program is focused around U.S. policy shifts and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. And we're just in the month of April, and a lot has happened in these few months since the U.S. President Donald Trump assumed office on the 20th of April. And the thoughts on everybody's mind has been, how is this affecting us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the wider region, and in fact globally? And so when we consider U.S. policy shifts, there are so many aspects of our day-to-day lives, of the future progress of our country that are affected. We're talking about things like trade, migration patterns as our citizens are coming home under their own will or being forcibly removed from the United States. We're talking about the impact of U.S. policy on crime and what our crime outlook will look like for the region. We also are considering things like food security, being that our main trading partner is the United States. How will this affect what we have on our grocery shelves? How will this affect prices? How will this affect inflation for the coming years? And of course, tourism, our main industry here in St. Kitts and Nevis, which is very heavily impacted by what happens in the United States. So there's a lot to consider when we are looking at U.S. policy and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. Again, I would like to invite you to call in if you would like to share your perspectives, share your ideas, if you agree or disagree with anything that's said on this program. And we are always inviting hosts and guests onto the program. So if you have a burning passion, if you have ideas that you want to share, if you're looking for a platform, give us a call. Remember, the number is 0989, and that is WinFM. And we're available on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Instagram. So let's backtrack a little, and let's go over a little bit of a timeline as to what has led us here in 2025. So U.S. President Donald Trump was inaugurated on the 20th of January, and with his inauguration came a series of executive orders signed on a wide array of issues that are relevant in the United States and globally. For us here in the Caribbean, our first issue of concern, I think, was raised when the issue of the Cuban doctors and the Cuban medical teams working in the Caribbean was an issue that was raised. And that was addressed by our foreign minister, our Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Dr. Douglas. And he addressed that in an adjournment of Parliament when he spoke about his concerns on an executive order that spoke to an expansion of visa restrictions. And those visa restrictions would be placed on Caribbean leaders, not just here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but as we know, we have Cuban doctors across the Caribbean who are working in our hospitals, our health centers. And so those visa restrictions would be placed on Caribbean leaders and members of parliament in government who are seen to be, quote unquote, exploiting the use of Cuban medical workers. And around that time, we also did see, as President Trump began executing some deportation orders, we did have the deportation of 60 plus nationals from St. Kitts and Nevis that was recorded. And so what was the response to that across the region? So immediately we did hear responses from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, who would have come out strongly in support of the relationship, the long relationship that Cuba has had with the Caribbean in terms of the exchange of medical care professionals, but also the provision of education for Caribbean students. The Honorable Mia Motley of Barbados would have also come out with a very strongly worded statement recognizing the work that the Cuban officials and Cuban doctors, the Cuban medical officials and doctors do in Barbados and across the Caribbean. And so that issue was something that was very heavily on the minds of Caribbean people and here in St. Kitts and Nevis, especially in the month of March. Now, at the end of March, U.S. Secretary of State Mark Rubio would have met with CARICOM leaders in Jamaica. He also traveled to Guyana and Suriname. And at this juncture, it's important to note that Secretary Rubio is of Cuban descent. His parents were Cuban immigrants who came to the United States in the 50s. And so he himself, of course, has a very close relationship with, and I'm sure a very complicated relationship with Cuba. So the CARICOM leaders would have met, and our leaders across the region would have discussed this issue and amongst other issues with Secretary of State Rubio. That meeting would have taken place in Jamaica at the end of March. And emerging from that meeting, what we are hearing is that there's an assurance by Caribbean leaders that there is no intention or no practice of exploitation of Cuban medical workers. And they provided an assurance, as they would have stated to the media, that the Cuban medical workers are being fairly compensated, that all of our labor laws are being observed, and that they're being treated at the highest standards of any medical professional, as a medical professional would be here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so from that meeting, we have not heard any more. But of course, we have to remember that we don't have a certainty as to the way that this situation will progress. We are understanding that assurances have been given to the Secretary of State, and those assurances will be taken back to Washington. But of course, that's something that we need to keep in mind. So that was the first issue, the first major issue that really touched us here in the Caribbean, coming out of the U.S. policy changes and the executive orders that President Trump would have put aside. And that is, of course, aside from deportation orders and the question of our own citizens who are living abroad in the United States. So beyond that, and coming from that situation, we had on the 2nd of April, the Honorable President confirming the tariffs that he will be imposing on a variety of countries, almost all of the countries around the world. And so tariffs, of course, are taxes. We were hoping to have some economists to weigh in. And so economists out there in the listening audience, you're welcome to call in to give us your feedback, give us your input, and give us your views on this. However, the tariffs that President Trump has been discussing are what he calls retaliatory tariffs. And he would have given a formula by which he would have worked out the tariffs for each country. And I know we have seen a lot of discussion in the news with regarding to the formula, the way the tariffs were worked out. But the long and the short of it, if we look at the way that St. Kitts and Nevis emerged, we emerged on the 2nd of April with 10% tariffs placed on us. Now, what exactly does that mean for us? Tariffs are placed on exports. Anything that we export to the United States, the tariffs are placed on those export goods or services, and those tariffs are absorbed by the consumer within the United States. Now, in looking at our budgets and in looking at our economic breakdown, St. Kitts and Nevis does have a deficit with the United States. And so what does that mean? It means that our trade, what we export to the United States, is far less than what we import from the United States. In fact, looking at the numbers, there is a $750 million deficit with the United States. And so that means that our balance of trade, that we send out $750 more million to the United States than the United States will earn from us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so that is an imbalance of trade. And on that basis, the tariff of 10% was put in place by Donald Trump. And we've heard our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, address at length some of these tariffs and, the way some of the policies that St. Kitts and Nevis will have towards these. And so the Prime Minister did acknowledge that there's unease, of course, and this unease was reflected in the global markets. We saw on Monday huge uncertainty in the United States stock market, which has since stabilized. We saw a sell-off of U.S. government bonds and a movement over to German government bonds, which are seen as more stable. But what our Prime Minister has said is that no country can escape from these tariffs. And in a globalized and interconnected world, of course, that is the case. We are all dependent on each other. Our trade affects each other, and even more so here in the Caribbean. We are often considered the third border of the United States. And there's a saying that if the United States sneezes, we catch pneumonia and die. So this is something that is very, very integral. And I've heard a lot of people say, oh, whatever happens in the U.S., it doesn't matter. Everything that does happen does trickle down. So our Prime Minister has said that, we have a deficit, and that so immediately this 10%, will not affect us in the same way it would as if we had a majority of goods being sent to the United States. However, we do have to look at the trickle down and the long-term effects that this tariff would have on us. And so it's important to note, our Prime Minister's response to this has been that we need to look at what we consume, our consumption patterns, the sources of our goods, our services, and consider changing our consumption patterns. And so this is a very interesting response. It is something that is open for discussion. It's something that we would like you to think about very carefully as our listening audience. We are hoping that our economists are thinking about it, our farmers are thinking about it. But the truth is that the majority of our goods come from the United States. If we go on our shelves, we see things from the United States. And the argument of the Prime Minister that instead of buying Lay's potato chips, we should buy Sunshine brand potato chips is an argument that does place some of the onus on us, the consumers. But we have to reciprocally ask for you, our government, what kind of policies are you going to be putting in place to ensure that we gravitate towards local brands or regional brands, or that our supermarkets stock the Sunshine chips instead of the Lay's chips? And so these are all questions that I know we have begun to put towards our leaders, our ministries of trade, and these are questions that we're going to have to grapple with over the coming months and the coming years of Donald Trump's presidency. And so some of the ways in which our leaders have responded, of course, we touched on our Minister of Foreign Affairs' responses to the Cuban situation. Our Prime Minister in his roundtable discussion on the 2nd of April would have responded. He would have spoken about our trade deficit with the United States. And he would have spoken about the importance for, number one, domestic food production. And that is something that we've heard about a lot with the 25 by 25, the increasing and expanding and diversifying our agricultural product. But he would have also spoken about exploring new trade routes and energy security. And I think that is something that is very interesting, because if we do a little bit of research, and just allow me to pull up the numbers, and we look at the exports that the United States has with St. Kitts and Nevis, and we even look at China and the exports that they have, we see that petroleum is one of our largest imports here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so the importation of petroleum from both China and the United States contributes hugely to our import bill. And so any type of instability will immediately mean the rising of petroleum prices. And we know that we did have an agreement with Venezuela, and that would have been under formerly President Chavez and President Maduro after him. However, that agreement, given the situation in Venezuela, has broken down. And so now we are heavily reliant on petroleum, gas, natural gas, and oil from both the US and from China. And so this is something that we really have to be concerned about. All right, so this is a lot of food for thought. Please remember to call in. I don't want to just be banging my mouth myself. I want to hear your voices. So call in. The number to call, 466-0989. And you are listening to Win FM Inside the News.
This April, TDC Home and Building Depot is turning green. Get 20% off energy-efficient and eco-friendly products from April 7th to 30th. Plus, during Earth Week, April 16th to 22nd, win energy-saving bulbs and reusable shopping bags. Join us for product demos and expert consultations. Make the switch. We're going reusable. Go green with TDC Home and Building Depot. Hurry in or visit us online today at shoptdcgroup.com. TDC. Together we succeed.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib, it's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
People make the world go
Welcome back to Inside the News here on Win FM. It is Saturday, the 12th of April. We are already almost halfway through the month of April. And this morning we are discussing U.S. policy shifts over these past 4 months of 2025 and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. Please be reminded that the number to call in is 466-0989. We are waiting for your calls. We want to hear your opinions. We want you to agree or disagree strongly with everything that we are saying here on the air in the studios of Win FM. We're discussing the U.S. policy, the changes, the rapid and almost drastic changes that have taken place over the past 4 months, and what it means for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So please do give us a call and air your views on Inside the News. So when we left off for our commercial break, we had already discussed a timeline of the major events that have taken place since that January 20th inauguration of President Trump. We have thought about the ways in which the policies, especially the tariffs, will directly and indirectly affect us here in the Caribbean. And we considered some of the responses from our leaders. So I would like to turn a little bit more to the response from our Prime Minister and also speak about over in Nevis, the response from our Premier and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Mark Brantley. So Prime Minister Drew has spoken extensively about the partnerships that he has worked to forge with countries around the world beyond the United States. And we're going to be touching a little bit more on that because at the end of last month, Prime Minister Drew led a delegation to the West African country of Nigeria. And that delegation was specifically a trade and investment discussion. And so they would have attended an investment conference or an investment summit. And these investment summits are held globally. And in fact, here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we will be seeing an investment summit taking place in May. So it will be interesting to see the attendees of that investment summit and how much of Dr. Drew's efforts are reciprocated coming up in May. But Dr. Drew spoke about the importance of forging alternative partnerships. And when we're talking about alternative partnerships, we are considering South-South cooperation. That is cooperation between developing countries around the world, looking to partners beyond the West, beyond the United States, beyond Europe, while of course recognizing that the United States has been and will of course continue to be of huge influence on us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. The importance of diversifying our partnerships. And so in his visit, Dr. Drew would have also taken the chairman of the CIU, the Citizenship by Investment Unit. And so, of course, we do understand that one of our biggest partners in the Citizenship by Investment program is Nigeria. We don't have, or if we do, I have not seen the exact statistics, the breakdown of countries. And that is something, by the way, I would like to put out a call. The freedom of information as regards to statistics related to our Citizenship by Investment program. And that is something that I've heard a lot of citizens here in St. Kitts and Nevis speak about, the importance of understanding the breakdown of where our citizens by investment are coming from, the countries of origin, the numbers of citizens or citizenships that are being granted per quarter, per year, and of course the revenue that is being generated by that. But all that being aside, Dr. Drew would have met with a very high-level delegation in Nigeria, and that delegation was billed as attracting high net worth individuals, which is a slang, I guess, in the investment world, which simply means people of means in Nigeria, and I'm assuming, of course, in the wider West Africa. And so that from that summit, we have heard Dr. Drew speak about some of the things that have come out of that summit. And it was not just about citizenship by investment, but for me, in reading the partners and in analyzing the people that he met with, that came out to me as one of the major thrusts of that summit. However, we do see that he also spoke about agribusiness, seeking investors and partnerships for expanding our agricultural sector here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And of course, very importantly, the energy sector. And I spoke prior to the break about the importance of diversifying our sources of energy. And we do know that over the waters in Nevis, there has been a lot of talk about geothermal, not as much talk about solar energy as there should be, in my opinion. However, you can disagree or agree with me. But diversification of our energy is something else that is, very, very much on our minds. Now, interestingly, Nigeria is the largest economy of Africa. It is one of the most populous countries in Africa. And a lot of the wealth of Nigeria is based on the oil economy. Now, is that to say that Nigeria has established itself as a solid trading partner? That is something that is still to be established, of course, in the future. Having been to Nigeria myself, I can say that that country has its own set of problems as relates to energy production and the oil economy. In fact, large portions of Nigeria are without electricity for significant parts of the daytime, and even in the capital, Abuja, in the nighttime, many people use generators to generate electricity. And the main reason for that is that in order to gain foreign exchange, Nigeria exports its petroleum and its natural gas products rather than use them in country. So with all of that being said, our Prime Minister has returned from what we hope is a very meaningful trip to Nigeria. And there will be an Investment Gateway Summit hosted in St. Kitts in May. I hope that we all pay close attention to those partners who come to that summit, who attend. And interestingly, in September, there will be a CARICOM and African Union Summit that will be hosted in Addis Ababa. And so from that summit, which this is not the first CARICOM and AU summit, but we are seeing a concerted effort by the region to reach out to the mother continent, per se, to reach out to Africa. And this is something I think that has huge potential for development, has huge potential for South-South cooperation between the Caribbean and between Africa. And we, of course, have already seen links being established with a direct flight from Antigua to, I believe it is, Nigeria. And so those links are being strengthened, and that's something that we can only see as a positive for the region. However, here in the Caribbean, we also have to be pragmatic. We have to be realistic, and we have to recognize that our trading routes are primarily with the United States. And so the question arises, and this is a question that our Premier would have raised as well, why are we so heavily dependent on trade with the United States? We have never been a U.S. colony or territory, as the Virgin Islands and some others have been. But why have we consistently relied on the United States for many, many of our imports? And there are a variety of reasons that arise. In doing research, I would have looked at a paper by the IMF from 2024 that would have spoken to some of the difficulties that we face in the region in terms of interregional trade or even trade with Latin America and the Caribbean. And so I'll just list a few of those. We'll discuss a few of those. And please remember, the number to call in is 466-0989. I would love to hear from you if you disagree with what I'm saying, if you have something that you would like to add, if you have any ideas or thoughts, suggestions for our leaders, please give a call. So it's 466-0989. and it is Win FM Inside the News. Remember that we are also on YouTube, on Facebook Live, and on Instagram. So call in. All right, so I'm going to turn it over to some of the limitations, the reasons that we have not been able to expand beyond trade with the United States. So the first one, of course, is tariffs that we set within ourselves as a region, unequal taxes that we might have against, say, Barbados or Jamaica or Guyana. And that in itself is a barrier to trade, or has been recognized as a barrier to free trade. The second is our infrastructure. And this was identified by the IMF as the main issue that we face, one of the main two issues that we face. And by infrastructure, we mean our transportation infrastructure, our port facilities, our shipping lanes, our abilities and structures to move goods and services easily, quickly, and safely between our islands and between us and Latin America. And of course, the US has recognized the importance of trade infrastructure. We've seen in the news their deep interest in the Panama Canal. And by the way, just to remind the listening public, the Panama Canal was largely built by Caribbean people. We would have had close to 100,000 laborers from the Caribbean who would have traveled in the early 1900s from countries like St. Kitts and Nevis to work on the Panama Canal. And we would have had close to 5,000 people who perished in building that incredibly tremendous, huge canal. And so that is something, the control of shipping lanes and the establishment of shipping infrastructure and trade infrastructure is something that the IMF has recognized is lacking in our region as well as with our partners in Latin America. Something else that was pointed to is our customs regulations. And I know when I say customs regulations, everybody holding the head and bawling. Because when we buy our things from Shane and we buy our things from eBay and we paid $10 to buy those things online and we go to try and collect them, we feel like there's a huge customs charge that is being placed on our items. And this in itself is a whole discussion for a whole program. And we would love to have that program. So customs controllers, we're calling on you, and trade officials, we're calling on you as well, economists. But our customs charges are one of the large ways that our government generates income. And we have to bear in mind that we do not have a tax on personal income. In countries like the United States, if you are in a certain income bracket, up to 20%, 30% of your income can be taken in tax by the government. And that is something that we do not have here in St. Kitts and Nevis. It is something that was done away with in, I believe, the 1980s. And that is something that perhaps we need to discuss, we need to reconsider, because at the moment, the punishing taxes on the people are going to be the customs taxes. And the other taxes that are essential, taxes are essential and taxes are important because those generate revenue and income for our country to run, for our roads to be fixed, for our schools to be taken care of, for our hospitals to be built. So there's no argument against taxes, but there does need to be a discussion of the source of these taxes. And so the IMF paper did identify customs regulations and charges as one of the main barriers to trade. I mean, and we can imagine if Barbados has the option to ship their sunshine ships to St. Kitts and Nevis or ship them to the United States. And once they send them to St. Kitts and Nevis, our government puts on, say, for example, 20% extra, then people are going to be less reluctant to buy. Whereas if they're shipped to a country like the United States, and right now the tariff stands at 10%, it's basic economics as to, where the consumer will purchase. And so if we're looking at our taxes, our customs charges within our different CARICOM territories and within our Latin American partners. That is something too that needs serious harmonization, that needs serious discussion amongst the region. And so that is going to be something that our CARICOM leaders will have to address, and it's going to be something that is on the table for the future. All right, so you are listening to Win FM. The time is flying by. It is Inside the News. Please call in 466-0989. Like us and follow us on YouTube, Facebook Live, and Instagram. And we'll be right back after this short break.
People make the world go
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
More than 42 million cars from 19 different car companies are being recalled for faulty airbag inflators. Repairs are fast, easy, and free. The problem isn't with the airbag, it's with the airbag inflator. Because the inflator can rupture, shooting shrapnel through the airbag, which can cause serious injury or even death. Don't risk it, fix it.
Please contact TDC Automotive Division to find out if your Toyota vehicle is affected by the Takata airbag recall. Visit or call us at 465-2511 in St. Kitts or 469-5430 in Nevis.
People make the world go
And we're back. You are listening and tuned in to Win FM's Inside the News. And we do have a call, so caller, go ahead. Good morning. Welcome to Inside the News.
Pleasant good morning. Hello? Hello? Hello?
Sorry, caller, go ahead. Good morning.
You can hear me? Hello, you can hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear. Go ahead, please.
Okay. You were talking about the trade between the United States and...
Okay, we might have lost that caller. So caller, please call in again. I was hearing you, and then I think the call dropped. So please call in again. The number to call, 466-0989. We always welcome our callers. So welcome back. We are on Inside the News here on Win FM. We are discussing U.S. policy shifts and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. This has been at the forefront of the minds of all of our leaders, and I must say, of course, our members of opposition. So members of opposition, please put out your statements as well. as to the way forward for our country. So when we left off on our commercial break, I was discussing some of the limitations that we are seeing to diversifying and expanding our trade with partners beyond the United States. And so our Premier, my apologies, the Honorable Mark Brantley, would have spoken at a press conference on the 31st of March to this need for trade diversification. And he would have highlighted the impact of President Trump's America First agenda. And so some of the things that he would have emphasized are the importance of establishing trade relationships with South and Central America. And so we do know we have vast countries, Brazil, Argentina, countries in South America who produce enormous amounts. And in fact, many of those countries do not, like the Caribbean does, rely solely on imports from the United States. So the question is, why can't we establish closer trading links with those partners, partners to the south and partners in Central America? And so our premier would have echoed what has been said by the IMF, is that our transportation links are something that are sorely lacking. And as we are speaking about transportation links, we do have to pause to highlight that beyond the tariffs that President Trump is placing on the Caribbean, those tariffs of 10%, and while we're talking about those tariffs, we do have to note that on the 2nd of April, those tariffs were confirmed. However, on the 7th of April, which is just this past Wednesday, there was a statement made by President Trump. At first, it was made on his media platform, Truth Social, but then it was confirmed by the White House that there will be a 90-day pause on the tariffs that are placed. That is tariffs on all countries with the exception of the tariffs placed on China. And so we do recognize that there has been an escalation of the tariffs placed upon China, that those tariffs have now been escalated to 125%, and China has issued reciprocal tariffs. And so this is what experts consider a trade war. It is not a war of guns. It is a Cold War in a sense that it is a war of economic proportions. And so this 90-day pause that President Trump has placed on the tariffs has been billed as a time for negotiation. President Trump has been very vocal about the fact that he believes countries have come to him to negotiate some of their tariffs. And he believes that this is the way for America First. And America First really translates to American production of goods and jobs within America. And now the reality of this being possible is, of course, up for debate. We're in a globalized world where our iPhones contain things from 80 plus different countries. And so the actual possibility of America only produced, or any country only producing all of the goods, is very difficult to imagine. However, that is the vision that President Trump has placed in his 2025 agenda and his speeches. So that is something that, we really have to consider. However, the tariffs on China also extend to tariffs on Chinese ships. And the tariffs on Chinese ships is something that is going to hit us very close to home here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And when we're talking about Chinese ships, we mean ships that are registered or built in China. We know that our tropical shipping line has a number of vessels that are Chinese built and registered, and other shipping lines that do serve us here in the Caribbean are Chinese built and registered. And so this does raise immediate concerns about the transportation of goods into the Caribbean. And in discussing our transportation of goods, we recognize that a major transshipment point is the United States. And that is for transshipment of goods, but also for transshipment of people. So if I here in St. Kitts and Nevis want to go to a Central American country like Panama, which is in fact due west of us, instead of flying directly to Panama, my cheapest and easiest option is to fly north to Miami and then fly from Miami to Panama. And in the transportation of people as well as the transportation of goods, the United States is a major transshipment point for us here in the Caribbean, meaning that almost everything that we touch, whether it was manufactured in China or India or South Korea, has transshipped or passed through the United States. And so those punishing tariffs on ships that are registered in China could impact us directly. So if we're looking at trading with partners in South America, right now the way the trading routes are set up means that if we trade Brazilian beef or Brazilian cattle, those cattle don't necessarily come directly from Brazil north to St. Kitts and Nevis. That Brazilian beef would have to pass through Miami before coming south, or pass through the United States before coming south to us. So this is something that is of huge concern, and this is something that CARICOM is going to be suggesting. Now, we've already seen our leaders on a mission to Africa. I think the question on everybody's minds is, when is the mission to Brazil? When is the mission to Argentina? When will, not just St. Kitts and Nevis, but when will CARICOM as a unified bloc be making negotiations and be making forays into trade partners within the region? And so that is something that we really need to discuss. It's important to note that as St. Kitts and Nevis citizens, we have visa-free access to every single country in South and Central America that is save for Mexico, but every other country we do have visa-free access. We do not have any airlines that directly fly from St. Kitts to any country in Central or South America. We have to go to St. Martin, and there we can get Copa or Avianca, and those airlines will connect us with Costa Rica, with Panama, with countries, in South America and Central America. But that too is something that we need to explore. We also need to look at what our companies, our private sector here on the ground is doing. And I'm talking about places like Rams, Value Mart. How are their policies shifting to reflect the shift in U.S. government policy? Is Rams still going to be importing from the United States at the volume that they currently import? And these are things that the Chamber of Industry and Commerce has been looking at very carefully. And we hope to hear and continue to hear from our private sector leaders in the Chamber as to the way forward for our local businesses. And consumers, I would like to encourage you as well, as you go into your supermarkets, whether it be Rams, whether it be Value Mart, whether it be Best Buy, whether it be your local supermarkets, take a look at the items on the shelf. Figure out which items are made in the United States, which items are made in the UK, which items are Caribbean-based. Now, north of the United States, Canada has also been facing its own set of challenges and problems. And President Trump has been very vocal about expressing his dissatisfaction with the current status quo between the United States and Canada as relates to the existence of a border, as relates to the tariffs that Canada places on goods that it sends into the United States. And he has gone so far as to speaking about Canada as the 51st state. Now, Canadians have reciprocated and have become united in their decisions not to consume U.S. produced goods. And so on shelves across Canada, they've been popping up Made in Canada signs. U.S. goods have been removed. We've seen online videos, news items highlighting U.S. alcohol and other goods being removed from Canadian shelves. And so consumer patterns of behavior in Canada are changing. The question is, will a similar shift be seen here in St. Kitts and Nevis? Are our citizens, are our consumers discerning? I know at the moment, consumption patterns are largely driven by price. So if the Chinese selling it for $10 and the shop on the corner is selling it for $20, we're going Chinese because that is what drives our demand. The question is, will that still be sustainable? And so that, of course, is something aside that we do have to discuss. The large presence of Chinese vendors and Chinese-owned businesses here in St. Kitts and Nevis. If China is engaged in a trade war with the United States, it doesn't only mean that U.S.-produced products and goods will be affected and prices will fluctuate. It also does mean that prices on Chinese goods will be affected. And so that is a whole other aspect that we do need to take a look at. And it's left to be seen whether in the future the United States will begin to apply diplomatic pressure to countries with large portions of Chinese investors. And so let's wrap it up from there. Let's take a think about that. You are listening to Inside the News. Again, please call in. Don't let me chat and chat all morning long. I would love to hear from my listening audience. The number is 466-0989. We're discussing U.S. policy shifts, the way forward for SKN.
People make the world go
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Let TDC Financial Services help you go for your goals. Whether you're thinking of taking that grand vacation, down payment on a house, higher education, TDC Financial Services has various plans that will allow you to go for your goals. Choose from the Accumulator Plus, Investment Starter Plan, and Fixed Deposit. Ready to go for your goals? Visit us at TDC Financial Services, where money is made easy.
People make the world go
Good morning. Thank you for calling Inside the News. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. I think it is afternoon. Good morning. Listen, I'm listening to your program on the internet. And,
Wonderful, yes.
on the internet. And the volume is very low.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're having some technical difficulties with hearing on the internet?
Well, no, it's not with the internet. The volume that's coming from your
The volume is
program.
too low. Okay, so our technical department is going to take a look at that right now. I'm so sorry about that. We're working in studio
Yeah.
right now to get that resolved.
If you can turn up the volume so that we don't have to strain our ears.
Certainly. But I'd love to hear any of your feedback on the program so far. I'm sure that you have some good input, some good ideas. So can I ask you, what is your take on the way that St. Kitts Nevis needs to move forward?
Well, I just tuned in, so I didn't hear the internet. But it sounds good. It sounds like a good transition forward, going forward.
Okay, wonderful, sir. So we're going to make sure to turn up the volumes in studio. We're urging you to
Yeah.
stay tuned for the second half of the program. And please call back with any ideas that you might have, any disagreements that you might have with us. So thank you so much for tuning in to Win FM.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a happy Saturday.
You too.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are inside the news, where we discuss in a nonpartisan but clear and informed manner issues happening locally, regionally, and internationally in our news, and the way that these issues affect us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Inside the News is a long-standing discussion program that takes place every Saturday morning on Win FM. We address issues that we feel are important to the news, and we welcome callers to call in and share your views. It is my first week back after quite a hiatus, and so it's been a delight to be back on Inside the News. My name is Joy Napier. I am your host for this morning's program. We do have an exciting slate of programs coming up in the coming weeks, and so at the end of the program, I'll share a little bit more of what you have to look forward to every Saturday morning. This morning, we are discussing U.S. policy shifts and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. We have been examining some of the decisions made by President Trump and the consequences and unintended consequences and ripples that those decisions will have for us here in the Caribbean. And we remember that when the U.S. sneezes, the Caribbean catches a cold. We are in the backyard of that great nation to the north, the United States of America. And so we have to pay keen attention to what is taking place there. We would have discussed the responses from our leaders to the policies, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Dr. Douglas, who would have addressed issues that were raised regarding the Cuban medical professionals. We would have discussed our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew's recent trip to Nigeria and his efforts to expand relations with countries in the Global South. We would have also addressed the response from Nevis's Premier and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Mark Brantley, who has as well called for a measured and a collective approach when dealing with President Trump. He has called for calm across the Caribbean and reminded us that the Caribbean is the third border of the United States. And so this shift in U.S. policy, these rapid changes, do of course have very big impact on us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so in examining these U.S. shifts and these U.S. changes, we're inviting you, the listening public, to call in, give us your views. Are you seeing differences on the grocery shelves? Do prices continue to escalate? And this uncertainty, this global, I should say, uncertainty surrounding U.S. policy, we have to put it into context because this has emerged from deeper economic uncertainty. And we are going as far back as the COVID pandemic. And so in the years post-2020, 2021, we saw rapid inflation. We saw what was termed a cost of living crisis as the world's economies grappled with the fallout from COVID-19. We saw ourselves, St. Kitts and Nevis, struggling to find equilibrium as our tourism sector was deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we have just seemed to come to some sort of a gain, some sort of a resumption of quote unquote normal. However, now with the economic policies and the saber rattling, I should say, that has been taking place between the United States and China, we are again in the land of uncertainty. I would like to highlight what the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association has said about this uncertainty, and they've become one of the latest regional bodies to voice some concerns regarding these tariffs. And so they have emphasized specifically the tariffs, but also the $1.5 million levy on Chinese-made or Chinese flag-carrying vessels that dock in the United States. And so we spoke earlier about how this levy will translate to an extreme increase in commodity prices. And so that's prices of food and prices of anything that's transported by those ships. So the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, as a unified body, has submitted feedback to U.S. officials and representatives of the U.S. Department of Trade. They have called for safeguarding of trade between the Caribbean and the U.S., and they have spoken about the way that these tariffs will raise the cost of imports and will ultimately raise the costs for U.S. tourists traveling to the Caribbean. That is for both land-based tourists as well as cruise passengers. And we know that here in St. Kitts and Nevis, we depend heavily on our tourist industry. They are calling for an exemption of tariffs that are related to Chinese vessels for countries in the Caribbean, recognizing the long relationship that the Caribbean and the United States have had, especially in the tourism industry. And even our president of the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, that's Mr. Trevor Blake, has highlighted the impact that these tariffs will have on the cost of living here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so there are a lot of red flags. There are a lot of concerns being raised with regards to the way forward. And honestly, I don't think any of us have the concrete answers. I myself certainly don't. But I think even further up, our trade officials, our leaders, and our regional leaders are grappling with the way forward. And so that's why we want to hear from you, the people. Do call in. What is the way forward for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis? The number to call, 466-0989. Please call in. Please drop a comment, drop a like, and share our live. We're on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We are WinFM Inside the News. All right, so we're turning now, after that long and slightly depressing discussion of the tariffs, to a few other things that have been taking place in the news, and things that will as well affect the St. Kitts and Nevis economy. This is the second half of our program, Inside the News, where we do examine issues that are taking place locally, regionally, and internationally. So one of the concerns that has been very heavy on everyone's mind is, in this time of economic uncertainty, the future of our Citizenship by Investment program. And so our Citizenship by Investment program is, as we know, a program that has generated enormous amounts of income for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We know that there has been a series of measures put in place to attempt to regulate the Citizenship by Investment program, to attempt to have more oversight on our CBI program. We have an entire unit, the CIU unit, headed by Mr. St. Just, that is put in place to examine the way forward for our Citizenship by Investment program, which, by the way, is one of the oldest here in the region. Now, most recently, we have heard from the EU that the European Parliament has proposed to abolish visa-free entry for Caribbean countries. And this proposal has actually come based on countries where citizenship can be obtained by investment. So the proposed EU regulation, it's a bill that has been put to the European Parliament, and it is proposed that citizens of Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and St. Lucia, those are all CBI countries, countries where the Citizenship by Investment program is up and running. The EU has proposed that those countries will now need to obtain visas for the Schengen area. The Schengen area is simply referring to countries that fall within the remit or are member states of the EU. So the committee of the EU Parliament has voted in favor of this change on the 19th of March. We have 41 EU members who voted for it, 10 against, and 21 abstentions. And so that means that these proposed changes have passed to the next level of legislation in the EU Parliament. Now, what are some of the reasons that have been given by the European Union for the implementation of these visa requirements on our countries? They have mentioned that the Citizenship by Investment Program is a possible threat, in quotes, because it allows individuals to bypass visa requirements without any connection to the country of the passport that they hold. All right, so it is basically the EU saying, we're not sure who these people be. You all don't know who these people be. So we want to put visas in place so we could check who these people be. All right, so we have already heard that we had this visa issue that came up with Canada. Now, this is a few years back. And we are now asked to get visas, and not only St. Kitts and Nevis, and we like to make this a local political issue. We like to blame our current prime minister, our current government, but this is a bigger regional issue, and this is something that will require regional attention. But we have heard that this took place in Canada. So now we are looking to the EU, and the impact of this in the EU could really affect our Citizenship by Investment Program. One of the main draws of our passport is visa-free access. We consistently hear our current Minister of Foreign Affairs, and we heard our former Minister of Foreign Affairs tout their success in gaining visa-free access to, it was close to 180 countries around the world. And so the process of having to apply for a visa, albeit on a St. Kitts and Nevis passport, as opposed to perhaps a weaker passport that would have been from the person's country of origin, that may possibly be a deterrent to somebody who is looking and shopping, because it is a shopping that they're doing, shopping for a passport for them to invest in. And so this is something that we need to watch closely. Inside the news, we're discussing current news items, but it is something that we really need to pay attention to. Now, if we look within the EU itself does have member states who have citizenship by investment programs. So I know you're saying, well, how can the EU tell us they don't like our CBI when they themselves have countries who have a CBI? So the main country in the EU, the European Union, that has a citizenship by investment program is the island of Malta. And Malta is a British protectorate. And the Maltese Citizenship by Investment Program is one of the oldest in the world, I believe. It's a very old citizenship by investment program and very well recognized. Bulgaria and Cyprus also did have citizenship by investment programs that have both been discontinued, and that discontinuation was due to pressure from the EU and threats about their eligibility to join unless they drop the program. And the European country of Montenegro does also have a citizenship by investment program, but is not an EU country. So we see that the EU itself is wrangling internally with its own countries that have CBI programs, but now they're extending to St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as some other countries in the Caribbean, conditionalities on our CBI program. And so that is something to watch closely as we look at our economic outcome, as we look at the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. And I'm sure that there are questions on all of our minds to our leaders as to what things are being put in place, what checks and balances and oversight is being put in place to manage our CBI program. And it is, of course, a very delicate balancing act. And so we'd like to hear from you. I'd like to turn it over to the phone lines. Good morning and welcome to Inside the News.
Hi, good morning. I was encouraged to call in. So my name is Dr. Martin, and I host Money Matters on WinFM on Mondays. And I understand that you're talking about trade and the impact on the U.S. So I was encouraged to call in, lend a voice to the discussion, and participate in any way that I can.
Well, Dr. Martin, your voice is always welcome on WinFM, and your expertise and your experiences, your views are definitely welcome. So we are indeed discussing U.S. policy shifts and some of the impacts that we see that it might have on the United States. So maybe if I can just ask you, what are your thoughts? What do you think is going to be the main thing that is going to affect us? How should we be making decisions as a country going forward?
There are several things happening, as you know. Well, we have the tariff wars, which you've covered, I'm sure, and the most recent abrupt pause, which was definitely real evidence of market manipulation this past week. The main way I think that we're going to feel the effects immediately is tourism. We see, and this came way before the tariff policy shifts. We saw it in shifts in just domestic policy, like education funding, the attack on DEI that we've acknowledged. That was preceded by the attack on affirmative action. So now we're seeing with this new Trump administration since January 17th and several executive orders, several people have been fired, have been let go across the government service. We now see rumblings in school districts that were federally funded with the abandonment of the Department of Education and that shift in policy again. And so who are those people, right? Those are everyday Americans that take vacations once a year. And where do they go? Usually to the Caribbean. Well, they might be tired of Mexico. So, hey, they will come to St. Kitts, maybe take that cruise. No, with no income, the effect on the disposable income is significant, you know?
Yeah.
So that's problematic overall. The immediate effect will be felt in tourism, and that's a very basic and simplified example. But that's immediate.
Now, Dr. Martin, we have heard our premier in Nevis who has called for a measured, a calm approach to U.S. policy. He's emphasized that Mr. Trump was democratically elected and that we need to remain a friend of the U.S. In contrast to that, we see, leaders like Mr. Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez in St. Vincent, who has spoken out strongly against Mr. Trump. What do you think we need to do here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
I have to be careful with my words. But the reality is, I think we need a measured approach, very similar to the Honorable Premier. We can't just be as reactive as the very, I would dare say, erratic U.S. leader. And because, you see, it's one thing, yes, there's an imbalance in trade, right? There might be imbalance in trade in terms of goods, but there's also a significant imbalance when it comes to services, and that's not often pushed out in the media. But the trade as the base currency of the world, of course, it's important, right? That and the U.S. being the biggest economy, the biggest consumption agent in the world, basically.
Right. I mean, the question really is, right? we are so globalized and interconnected. Is it even possible to isolate?
We're globalized because of the United States.
Yes.
I mean, the last 70 years has been some of the most amazing growth across the world because we allowed countries to specialize. So now we're talking about trade, right? And, we see how much we import from St. Kitts. Like, when you can't grow anything, when you don't have the assets and the resources, we understand that we'll always be net exporters. The goal is to close the gap, right? So how do we respond? We continue with the sustainability agenda, trying to increase local domestic production. We need to increase our population to widen our tax base to minimize the pressure that's put on every individual. We need to control prices immediately so you could keep disposable income available within the local economy and not just have businesses price gouging because the word tariff is being pushed around, right? Because the impact on St. Kitts in terms of pricing it's not as direct. It's going to be indirect, like you referenced the potential changes on the shipping costs, right? Well, that's potential. That's not actually been done for sure, right? Of what, $2,500 estimated. So we see the potential increases that could come there. We see the increases that could come in home building. We see the increases that are going to come in textiles. We see the increases that are coming even shopping on Shein and Temu, because he's specifically targeting those companies. We need aggressive looks for different trade routes. We should have had different trading partners in tourism and diversified that product long before, because wealth has shifted because of globalization.
Right, and
the immediate effect we're going to see is in tourism.
That brings me back to, and I'll just play devil's advocate here, because I hear you, touting some of the benefits of that specialization and globalization. But in the 90s especially, there was a lot of discussion about the negative possible fallout of, globalization and its discontents. Some of the things that are perhaps coming back to bite us, as the United States was telling us, free up. We had NAFTA. They told us free up the economy and globalize and integrate. But now with this radical shift, who are the ones who are going to be suffering from this globalization?
Oh, I mean, with the like you said, when the big dogs sneeze, we all catch a cold. It's not just the U.S. You're talking about Canada, Mexico, the G8 countries, right? We have globalization because of everything that happened post World War II, post Bretton Woods, post the different approaches in terms of like fiat currency, and not to go through a history lesson there, but that's what got us here, right? And everybody has benefited. Now, who has lost in a lot of cases has been the smaller countries like ours, right? Yeah. So now you see this global push for sustainability, this global push to counter the negative effects of climate change, right? So we have to.
But we are still the losers. We lost in globalization, and we're losing again because we're the ones who are disproportionately feeling the effects of causes that we didn't.
Did we lose in globalization though? Because what was the alternative, right? We pivoted from sugar and we went into services and tourism. Have we maximized those transitions? No. Right? We focused on cruise tourism instead of stay-over tourism. And you look across the region, our neighbors, Anguilla, Antigua, and Martin, they did the opposite. They went into stay-over tourism and then went to cruise. So you're seeing their economies being bolstered significantly as a result of tourism activity. And so we went about it the wrong way. We started with tourism, with cruise, and we abandoned airlift. And that's why we're playing catch-up now. That's just the reality, and this isn't political. This is a factual.
Right. I mean, I agree with you, and I would also say that even between St. Kitts and Nevis, in Nevis the trajectory was different, because Nevis didn't have that economic history of monoculture that St. Kitts did. But the question is, what was the plan in place? Was the plan executed to the best that it could be? And, do we need to take a look at our plan going forward, and what is our plan going forward? Because you're speaking about price control, but do we have price control on our goods? Do we have standardized prices in our supermarkets? Do we have oversights and legislations when prices are, rapidly boosted? So how are our consumers, how are we protected here?
Isn't there ministries that should look out for that, right? So now we're testing the efficacy of our systems.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, people are crying out. How can we reconcile that ECCB is saying that inflation is 2 to 3%, but yet prices are doubling week over week? How do we reconcile and accept that? Like, where's the pushback from those ministers or those senior government officials in those ministries? Where's the public press conferences and the public demonstrations? Right? Yeah, I understand because you see, shipping prices, that's dynamic, right? It's not just one flat cost, because these companies are trading in commodities markets. They're buying crude oil when it's low, and they're going to lock in those prices for future delivery.
Of course, and we see OPEC doing that all the time.
Exactly. So where are those savings? Why are they not passed on? We pass on costs all the time to the consumers, but we do not pass on services. And that's, it's so unfair. We don't pass on the gains, or the benefits.
So,
when it
Dr.
comes
Martin,
to
I
that.
know there's been a lot of discussion about, in many areas, political will. So, you're talking about the ministries that should be, in place, and those ministers and permanent secretaries who should be the ones who are safeguarding us, the people, from these price shocks, who should be setting things in place to absorb some of these market instabilities. But do you see that happening? And if you don't see that happening, how can we make sure that going forward, we are protecting us as the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis?
Well, you have to answer that question for me. I don't live there, so I can't tell the details of seeing it happen. I could only go based on the feedback I see and read from friends and on social media, and it doesn't appear that some of that. I've seen every press releases come out about baskets of goods, and the government don't have a lot of control. If we're
Right.
gonna
I
have a
think
free
that is the
market,
key point, huh? Who is in control?
right,
Because
right.
right now it's our private sector. Our private sector
Right.
is setting their prices. I go to Rams, and every week bread gone up, this gone up. And sometimes I'm tempted to take
But then
pictures. This is last week, but
there needs to be some sort of intervention in the marketplace, especially when we know we have underemployment in the economy, where people's
Exactly.
and wages are not at the point where they need to be to be comfortable. I
right. And
mean,
so that is why I'm bringing it back to your point about globalization. We are embracing this neoliberal model, but is it time that we look at the model and say, hey,
what's the alternative for us?
we need, we need at least at home to look at some interventions that we can put in place to protect the
And I
people.
think that's starting, right? We've seen a boost in domestic agricultural production. We need to reach to a state of self-sufficiency. I always used to say that if anything ever happened to the United States and they decided that they're never trading with another country in the Western Hemisphere, what's the one country that will be fine? Cuba.
Cuba, yeah.
Right. And it's because of, and again, now people would talk about the standard and the quality of life in Cuba. But, when it comes to the argument of sustainability, we have a model. We have at least a model for some industries like agriculture.
Yeah.
Right? And the only other thing, when you think about how can we compete, I remember giving a speech in St. Kitts about 6 years ago. And my emphasis then and my emphasis still is today, because I'm not seeing it. We have invested in infrastructure. Our people have benefited from quality education domestically, and healthcare has improved. It's still not where we would like it to be, but there is improvement. We could be honest and say that over the past 40 years. But what's the next step? Right? We've invested in the roads in the areas where the tourists are always at. But in St. Kitts, unlike Nevis, when you all put down a land project, a government project, you pave your roads. In St. Kitts, that's not the case. Even though we pay for it in our land prices, the infrastructure, right? So eventually they would come, 5, 10, 15 years. But what we don't do enough is invest in our people, right? That's what we need to focus on. We can't compete in lumber. We can't compete in even exporting agricultural production that we have, right? We might have some production, but it will never reach to the levels of tourism, financial services. So we need something else. Well, what can we compete on? People, human capital. I won't divulge, but I did bring an idea many years ago about the potential of bringing a school focused on IT applications, cybersecurity, web development, etc. Growing fields, AI, fields that are dominating right now, right? And it was ignored by the senior officials, and it was not this recent, it's not this current administration, that is, all right? So then you have to question the seriousness, because the only thing we can compete on really is human capital, because we have a financially literate base, right? We are financially literate as a people. Not financially literate, sorry. We are literate as a people, and because we are literate, we have that ability to scale, especially in some IT fields where you could enter in as little as 3 months of training, 6 months of training, right, on these technical skills. And we have a growing population of young people that are so tech savvy that we are not taking advantage of. And we really have to reposition ourselves in this new digital age, because data is the new sugar. Data is the new tourism. Data is the new gold. And if that's how the world is trending, we are very far behind.
I mean, I agree, and sometimes I think that it takes some sort of exogenous shock to get us to
We
realize.
had the
And I was,
exogenous
when COVID came along, I thought
That
this
was
would
the
be
exogenous shock.
our aha moment for St. Kitts and Nevis. We
Right.
saw the vulnerability of tourism. We saw even countries like Barbados that turned to digital nomads, that began investing
Yes.
in tech, that and so I thought that would be our moment, but it
Antigua
seems
as well.
yes, Antigua as well, exactly. But it seems that we have such a short historical memory, because as soon
We
as
went right back.
as
We
soon
went
as the
right
pandemic
back.
passed, where the cruise ships are coming in, and there's no change to our planning, no change to our long-term policies, no indication that there's some sort of a national shift in the way that we do business. And so, here again, I find ourselves at a pivotal moment, that this policy could be, there could be a silver lining to this cloud, that there could be a catalyst in this for us to make a change. But the question is,
Force change,
do we
right?
have
Yeah.
the impetus? Do we have the political will amongst our countries? And you've spoken about the education and the human resource of our people, but really and truly, I've read articles and I've seen data that points to the fact that we spend all of this money educating our people, only for our people to go somewhere else. So
Well, but what are they coming back to, though? Let's be honest. What are they coming back to? Why would
this is a
before
whole
I
other
go to-
discussion. This
Right,
is
right, right. That's a whole. You're right. It's a whole.
this
other
is a whole other
conversation.
discussion. But my argument has always been that it is a catch-22, and that we have to, as the people, we have to create what we are coming back to, because as more proactive.
I disagree. I
Well,
disagree. Well, as people,
we
yes,
can't
people
leave it
in
up. It can't
general-
always be up to our politicians to create opportunities for us. The more of us who come home, the more opportunities that we can create.
Okay.
If we all leave our country, the most forward-thinking people are out there. They're not here. But that's my little plug,
okay.
Dr. Martin. So come home.
I
Come home.
understand. Well, no, because I am not going to come home to be poor. I'm not going to come home to struggle. I'm not going to come home to be underpaid. No.
I understand
Like,
what you are saying.
When I look at the level of investment that we're asking our people to take, right? When we look at now, we've seen some changes where interest rates are now no longer at 9%; they're down to 5% at like a development bank. Okay,
Yes.
that's a positive shift in policy. The policy needs to go further. That while you're in school, no interest is accrued, interest is deferred. That's the problem. You cannot say that you're giving us a helping hand, but then you put such a price on it
On that
that
helping
it erodes the financial stability of a family that just want to move forward.
Yeah.
Right? Why are people and I'll invite you on my show and we can have this conversation on wages and salaries, because this is something I just talked about yesterday. I was assisting someone prepare for a presentation on budgeting. How can people budget what's not there? How can we save what's not there? We have major underemployment. Wages have been stagnant for over 20 years. We can't put that on people. You can't put it on me. I'm in financial services, wealth management. For me to come to St. Kitts and do what I do, I need legislative changes. That's not me.
I understand. I mean, but we do, those legislative changes will not come without pressure from the people and pressure from civil society. If there's no political will from, and I'm not saying this administration, I'm not saying the past, I'm saying over the course of decades, if there's no political will to do to make the transformations, to put in the progressive policies and legislation, we can't keep waiting around for the government to do it.
I do not disagree, but I can't say more.
Well,
I do not disagree, but I can't say more. I won't say more. But at this time, that is. But
I
yeah,
understand,
let's
but
have this
every
conversation.
decision has its counter decisions. You know, every
Of course,
decision
of
involves
course,
some sort of sacrifice of some
of
way.
course.
So,
Well, on Monday, we're going to be continuing our conversation on the Trump policies, and I'll be looking at immigration, agriculture, construction, a little bit more detail. I think those are the missing pieces, right? We're talking a lot about the tariffs, but we don't understand the true breakdown of how we'll be affected. I still see petitions and divisions on Facebook, Instagram supporting Trump,
oh gosh,
and they don't understand the significant
yeah,
cost that's happening. Right now, we're seeing shifts in the credit market. We're seeing and when credit markets move is when we have to really start to worry about recession. The great thing is that the shifts are acting how we would want them to act in terms of the more long-term bonds having higher interest rates right now.
right.
Yes,
But
that
I
has
did open.
some
I saw
effect.
that there was a shift towards German government bonds as well.
Well, yeah, people are going to shift towards stability, right? If they don't
Yeah.
think that the U.S. government is stable, I think this is going to lead to a significant increase in adoption or the consolidation or the implementation of BRICS,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're going to see that. We're already seeing enemies in the East, Japan, Korea, and China working together and creating their own regional trade bubbles.
Right.
So we're moving. They've been doing it for a while in terms of creating regional trading blocks, but we're going to see an increased push. I think under George Bush, the second Bush, there was a talk about a free trade area of the Americas, trying to get the entire Western Hemisphere in one free trade area using the U.S. dollar as the main currency. So there are a lot of these conversations. The thing about Trump and how Trump has always operated, if you look at his history, he's very impetuous. He just acts.
Right.
Right? It's
There's
the
not a
big stick approach.
predictable or linear, thing to follow.
And that's the
It's
problem. He is not predictable.
which
And that's
means
why
that we have to
markets are
protect our own
taking-
interests.
Exactly. Which is why I went to Facebook this week and I encouraged our people to take advantage. So the thing is, you either could suffer during this time or you could take advantage of it. And I know COVID created millionaires.
Yep.
And this second term of Trump also leads to the possibility of creating millionaires. But like you said, it puts us in a position to shift again.
I mean, when
Right,
we're talking
and
about those millionaires, I'm looking at our supermarkets here in St. Kitts and Nevis. During COVID, they were doing well.
Yep.
So I believe
I mean-
I agree, Dr. Martin. I agree that this is definitely a critical time. It's a time where the decisions we make can change the trajectory of our economy.
Yep. I agree.
All right, but I appreciate your time. And
Thanks for hearing me out. And hey, I would like to invite you to come on. We could spar. I'm looking
absolutely,
for a sparring partner. Looking for
absolutely.
that.
You know,
All right.
I'm not an economist. I'm a development, more in international development. But
But that's perfect though, right? Because that's the conversation that we need to be having right now.
yes.
Right? That strategic balance between strategy, sustainability, and aggressive economic expansion. So now is the time. It's a
All right.
pivotal
Well,
role,
thank you
but-
so much, Dr. Martin. I really, really appreciate all of your input. And I do want to pick your brains as well on financial literacy because I'm an educator by practice. And, I think that in
Anytime.
itself is one area in which our people are sorely lacking. So that is definitely
Anytime.
something, further down the road. But thank you for your call. And I appreciate all of your input onto Inside the News.
Amen. All right. Have a good day.
You as well. Take care. Thank you. All right, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you to our callers. Please call in. It's 466-0989. And we'll be right back after this short break.
People make the world go
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib, it's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
Hop into extra cash this Easter with TDC Financial Services. Need extra cash for your Easter celebrations? Whether it's shopping, home upgrades, a weekend getaway, or a fresh start. With TDC Financial Services Easter loan promotion, you can borrow up to $30,000 at low interest rates with affordable repayment terms. Getting your loan is quick and easy. Just visit any TDC Financial Services branch in St. Kitts on Central Street and in Nevis in the Longstone Building on Main Street in Charlestown. But hurry, this Easter offer is only available for a limited time. TDC Financial Services, where money is made easy.
People make the world go
Welcome back. We are on Inside the News. Thanks for joining us. I hope that everyone is having a wonderful Saturday morning as we discuss global affairs and their impact on St. Kitts and Nevis. I am your host, Joy Napier. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning as we discuss U.S. policy shifts and the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. We've had some riveting discussion this morning, and so I'm encouraging you to call in. The number to call is 0989-466. I almost said 469 as a division. It is 466-0989. So please do call in and air your views on WinFM. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, so you can join us anyway and think about the issues and let's start a conversation. So before our break, we were discussing U.S. policy. We've touched on a lot of different topics this morning. We've talked about the issue with Cuban medical workers. We have discussed the issue of tariffs and their impact on us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. And we're remembering that these tariffs have a much, much broader impact than just raising the cost of the dress that we buy on Shein. These tariffs are looking, and in fact, President Trump's policies are looking to impact almost every sector of the way that we do business here in St. Kitts and Nevis, from tourism to food security to crime to migration. And we're looking not only at the current impacts, but thinking about the way that we approach the future ramifications of these policies. And we're looking at the possibility of inflation and global recession. And so we are staying tuned to what is happening inside the news and with these policies. Now, as we're looking at some of the economic decisions, because we also did touch on the Citizenship by Investment program and the possible imposition of visa requirements for travelers with a St. Kitts Nevis passport to the EU and the Schengen region. We also are looking at some of the previous relationships that the United States has had with St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of previous trade agreements, in terms of loans and conditionalities and in terms of aid. And so we do know that President Trump's policies have had a huge domestic impact on the United States, as well as an international impact. And one of the departments that was the first to go, in fact, was USAID, which is the United States government's arm of international aid. And so we saw huge cuts in spending that were designated to USAID programs. There were several USAID programs that were active in the Eastern Caribbean region. Just as recently as last year, there was a program that was funded with regards to curbing crime and violence in several Eastern Caribbean countries, St. Kitts and Nevis being one of them. So the impacts of Mr. Trump's policies are not just on our financials, our economic markets, but they also are going to, of course, translate to social impacts. And as a country, as any country goes through economic hardship, of course, we see the trickle-down effect to the society, to things like social safety nets, our healthcare system, our education system, our welfare system. And so these are all interconnected factors. Now, something else that was taking place in the news just at the end of last year that is related to U.S. policy, we saw that there was an agreement signed between the Export-Import Bank of the United States, that's EXIM. A memorandum of understanding was signed with the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. And that memorandum of understanding, or MOU, was to secure potential financing in areas of cybersecurity, renewable energy, and other areas for the region's growth. And so for St. Kitts and Nevis specifically, the MOU provided access to up to $300 million in financing. And that was signed by the chair of the Exim Bank and our Prime Minister, the Honorable Terrence Michael Drew. That was signed at the U.S. Embassy on the 27th of November last year. And the areas for cooperation that were identified between the United States and St. Kitts and Nevis, cooperation and procurement, those areas included renewable energy, cybersecurity, critical minerals, and infrastructure. And so you might be asking, well, what is the purpose of EXIM? Is this a loan? So EXIM is really the United States credit agency. And the main role of EXIM is to support American jobs by making it easier for U.S. exports and U.S. trade relations with outside countries. It has a stated mission of advancing U.S. American competitiveness and assisting U.S. private sector and businesses as they compete for global sales. So it will be very interesting to see, given Mr. Trump's vast shift and changes in policy, it will be interesting to see where this deal goes. And I think these are questions that we can definitely pose to our leaders, as well as pose to our partners in the U.S. Embassy and in the United States in terms of, is this EXIM MOU still valid? Are we still going to have access to this currency for investment in future projects? And, you know, what will the future of these types of credit relationships be between the United States and St. Kitts and Nevis? So this adds an additional dimension to the relationship that we are having and to the considerations of what is happening in the United States right now. So please follow up. I know you want to stay inside the news on everything that is happening. Check that out and, follow up and keep yourselves posted on the way that this deal goes. So what else is trending in the news? We've talked a lot about U.S. policy. We've talked about the way that these shifts are going to affect us. And in fact, for those of you who are consumers, you may already be seeing or feeling the shifts. And I say those of you who are consumers, we are all consumers. So before we get to that, I'd like to turn it to the phone lines. Caller, good morning. You are on Inside the News.
Yeah, good morning. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, Good, good. I just got two questions. One, the Tabasco project. I don't know if you mentioned anything about that earlier today, but these tariffs. I know there's a pause on the tariffs right now, right? So the 10% that was imposed on Sinkers, that's still in effect, right? And if so, I'm trying to relate these continued tariffs, right, in terms of that Tabasco project that was signed off on already by the Prime Minister, and how is that will affect how the tariffs will affect that Tabasco project. And I noticed the Prime Minister had he released a statement about the trade deficit, right? But with that project, they have the 25 by 25 agenda, where they was targeting reducing the import food bill by 25%, but he didn't release any information in that regard. Is it time for that information to come out? And where is all this will go in terms of that 25 by 25 project, the Tabasco project? And lastly, if these tariffs continue for some time, we know the Eastern Caribbean currency dollar is linked to the United States. If these tariffs continue for a period of time, how and if it can affect the Eastern Caribbean currency dollar? And that's all my questions for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Those are some really well thought out and important questions. So I really appreciate your call. So caller, to address those questions, of course, I'm not the government, so I don't have all of the answers. I think some of these questions are questions that we can pose to our ministers. But with regards to the tariffs, there is currently a 90-day pause on the tariffs. So President Trump confirmed that as of April 2nd, the tariff that would be charged on St. Kitts and Nevis products entering and services entering the United States would be 10%. Now, as of the 90-day pause, that's roughly 3 months. So that will take us into April, May, June, about the end of June, July. We should be revisiting and we should be hearing more as to whether the U.S. policy will change, whether the tariffs will stay at that rate. But during that pause, the tariff rates are the rates that they were pre-President Trump's decision. Now, you reference the Tabasco project, and I'm assuming that you mean there's a project to grow, I think it is 100 acres of Tabasco peppers. There were recently quite a few showcases of the product that is being grown, and the plan is that these are grown for export. And of course, we are hoping that they're grown for export to the U.S. market. So that is something that definitely our Minister for Agriculture could be and should be addressing as to whether that agreement will still stand, whether we are still looking towards the U.S. as our export market. And so that is a very good question. And it also plays into our larger questions of if we are hoping to export agricultural products on a large scale, what is the best market? And this has to do with our strategy, our marketing strategy as a country. But it also does relate very heavily to the amounts of tariffs, the types of trade agreements that we have between each other, and also, of course, balancing our hopes of exporting, because exporting is always to gain foreign exchange, foreign currency. But while we're exporting, we have to look at the fact, is our import bill canceling out what we are exporting? So could that 100 acres of land better be used for agriculture here in St. Kitts and Nevis to cut down on the amount of food we're importing? These are all important questions that we can be asking. So yes, it was referenced, and our Prime Minister, the Honorable Dr. Terence Drew, has spoken about our trade deficit. St. Kitts and Nevis has a $750 million deficit. That means when we balance out the goods and services we export to the United States and the amount we buy or purchase from the United States, our deficit is $750 million. That's how much more we purchase than they purchase. So that's something that is very important to remember. But in all of this, we do have to look towards what our options are. And the whole program, I think we have been discussing, what are the ways forward for changing our approach, our economic approach. How can we, number one, diversify? How can we, number two, establish different trading partners and change patterns of trade? Number three, how can we strengthen our infrastructure? And when I say we, I don't just mean we in St. Kitts and Nevis, but this refers to the way that we are able to forge relationships with our CARICOM brothers and sisters. And, as far back as the West Indies Federation in the 50s, we recognize that as individual islands, we are only so strong. But if we come together as a unified bloc, there is so much more that we can do. You spoke as well, caller, about the ECCU, the currency unit, or the EC dollar. And this is also something that our economists are going to be watching, because we're pegged at 2.67 or 2.68 to the US dollar. And so it does mean any fluctuations in the US dollar will, of course, translate to equal fluctuations in the purchasing power of the EC dollar. So that is something else that we really need to stay abreast of. All right, so I'm encouraging you. We're almost wrapping up Inside the News. We've had a lot of hot topics. Please call in and give your final views. The number to call again is 466-0989. I am your host, Joy Napier. I'm just going to be touching on a few news bites as we wrap up our program today. We also see in the news that as of the last sitting of Parliament, we had the first and second reading of our plastic waste reduction bill. All right, what does that mean? One of the main and sudden impacts is that when you go to Rams, walk with your bag. All right, so we've seen that there is a complete ban on the t-shirt type plastic bags in all of our supermarkets, in all of our stores. And there's been mixed reaction, I know, to this ban. I have seen people who are happily bringing their shopping bags. I've also witnessed people who are abusing. But this is, a period of change. And so as we adjust to this new normal, I am sure that we will be conscious and just remind each other to bring our bags, walk with our bags. If you feel like this decision was not a good decision, feel free to call in. If you're in support of this decision and you recognize the environmental impact that plastics have on our country, please feel free to call in. And that bill is, of course, being spearheaded by our Minister for Sustainable Development. That's the Honorable Dr. Joy L. Clark. So that is something that, as we look towards being a sustainable island state and climate resilience, which is one of the major agendas of our current government, that is something that has been at the forefront. And so we're looking forward to seeing, as the months progress, how that impacts the type of waste that we generate here in St. Kitts and Nevis. So we hope as well that there'll be analysis and there'll be follow-up so we can understand how our shift from single-use plastics really has generated some change in our country. We also see major changes or major updates to legislation surrounding traffic. We have had a spate of traffic accidents. In fact, when I was looking at the data, between 2020 and 2025, we had 31 fatal accidents with 36 deaths. And that is indeed a sobering figure. We talk a lot about murder rate, and we abuse the government about murder rate, and we abuse everybody about murder rate. But this is 36 people who have died from traffic accidents in the past 5 years. The highest place, or the place with the most accidents, was identified as Basse-Terre, and 773 accidents on average take place in Basse-Terre every year. We also saw Old Road with 122 accidents per year. That is the second highest area for accidents. So we're imploring you, putting out the call, drive safely, drive carefully. There is no need for speed. We live on a small island. If you drive fast enough and far enough, you're going to reach right back where you started. So please take your time. We had several years ago, seatbelt legislations came into effect, and those seatbelt legislations are continuing. Please be reminded that all passengers in the front seat must wear seatbelts. And I do want to add that seatbelts are not for style. So if you're in the back seat, you're free to wear your seatbelt, and those seatbelts might very well save your life. Very recently, we have seen a call for dash cam videos, and we have seen a call for citizens to share if they see reckless driving. In fact, it seems that the traffic department has been inundated, and Facebook and social media have been inundated by videos and posts of people driving recklessly. It's almost frightening to see. I almost don't want to go on the road when I see all the videos and posts, but please keep sending. These you can send anonymously to roadsafety@gov.kn. That's roadsafety@gov.kn. So if you see somebody driving recklessly or badly, you never know the life that you save. Could be your own, could be your family members. So say something, call in, and let's make sure that we protect each other. We don't want those accident statistics. Some of those people are our loved ones, our family members. And in fact, last month alone, we had young people, a 15-year-old male on a bike and an 18-year-old female, and both of those were in the White Gardens area. So please, please, my fellow citizens and residents, drive safely. All right, we are nearing the end of our program. It has been a fabulous 2 hours spent with you, discussing U.S. policy shifts, discussing the way forward for St. Kitts and Nevis. We have touched on the timeline of President Trump's inauguration, his executive orders, his Secretary of State's meeting with Caribbean leaders, the concerns that were raised around Cuban doctors in St. Kitts and Nevis and the Caribbean, and now, of course, the tariffs, the markets towards the north, and what it means for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis. We talked about our Prime Minister's recent visit to Nigeria with a sizable delegation. We didn't talk about delegation size, but that was something on the lips of everyone. But we talked about his intent of forging closer partnerships and diversifying the partnerships and setting up more South-South cooperation. We looked at the responses of our leaders to President Trump's trade policies, and we even spoke with economist Dr. Martin about his take on the current trade situation, concerns about tariffs on China, the trade war escalating between the United States and China, and what it means for us here in the U.S. This is Inside the News on WinFM. It is a nonpartisan platform where we discuss everything that is happening on the news. We're inviting you to join us, call in, join as a panelist, and lend your expertise, your opinions, your ideas to the discussion. Again, we're looking for rational and reasoned debate. We're not here to sling mud. We're not here to politicize. We're here to discuss issues happening inside the news. We hope that you have a wonderful remainder of your weekend, and we thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Inside the News. Today is the 12th of April, 2025. I am your host, Joy Napier, and thank you again for joining us on WinFM Inside the News. Have a wonderful weekend.